Chapter 1. The Dumb One. Dulce Whitford learned very early that silence was safer than questions. At 28, she could still remember the sound of her mother's sigh whenever a teacher's number flashed on the kitchen phone, the way her father's jaw tightened before he even answered. The Whitford townhouse on the Upper East Side was always immaculate: cream walls, oil paintings, furniture chosen for legacy rather than comfort, but it never felt warm. It felt like a museum where Dulce was an exhibit no one wanted to acknowledge. Dulce, her father Gerald would say, rubbing his temples, "Why can't you just try harder?" She had been 7 the first time he said it. 7 and staring at a page of letters that refused to stay still. They flipped and tangled like threads in water. She knew the words when the teacher read them aloud. She knew the answers when she heard the questions. But when the book was in front of her, her mind froze. "I'm trying," she whispered. Gerald scoffed. "Miranda was reading chapter books at your age." Miranda. Always Miranda. Her older sister sat at the dining table with perfect posture, pencil moving smoothly across her homework. Miranda never looked confused. She never cried over assignments. She absorbed praise like oxygen. Teachers loved her. Her parents adored her. Dulce watched from the edge of the room, shrinking into her chair. One afternoon, Mrs. Hensley, her third-grade teacher, asked to speak privately with Gerald and their mother, Lorraine. Dulce sat in the hallway, feet dangling off the bench, tracing patterns into the carpet with her shoe. She could hear muffled voices through the door. "She's bright," Mrs. Hensley said gently, "but she struggles with reading. I think she may have dyslexia. With the right support—" "No," Gerald interrupted sharply. There was a pause. "No," the teacher repeated. "We don't label our children," Lorraine said coolly. "Dulce just needs discipline." "She needs effort," Gerald added. "Not excuses." When they came back out, Lorraine's smile was thin. "Get your bag," she told Dulce. "We're leaving." In the car, silence pressed heavy between them. Finally, Gerald spoke. "Do you know how embarrassing that was?" he asked. Dulce stared out the window at rows of identical brownstones. "I'm sorry. You should be," he said. "You're not slow. You just don't apply yourself. And if you keep this up, you'll fall behind. Is that what you want? To be the dumb one?" The words lodged somewhere deep and never left. By the time Dulce reached middle school, the family narrative was firmly established. Miranda was the star. Dulce was the problem. At dinner parties, relatives asked Miranda about her grades, her competitions, her future. And Dulce, an aunt would ask as an afterthought, "How's school?" "She's doing her best," Lorraine would say, which somehow sounded worse than an insult. When Dulce brought home a math test with a near-perfect score, numbers always made sense, steady and honest. Her father barely glanced at it. "Reading still weak?" he asked. "Yes," Dulce said quietly. "Then this doesn't matter," he replied, sliding the paper aside. Miranda's achievements were framed and hung in the hallway. Certificates, photos, trophies. Dulce's lived in a drawer. At 15, Dulce stopped asking for help. She learned instead to watch. She noticed how her parents' moods shifted depending on Miranda's successes. She learned when to speak and when silence would keep her safe. She learned how to finish group projects by doing the work no one wanted, organizing, structuring, fixing mistakes quietly at the end. At family gatherings, she became invisible on purpose. It hurt less than being dismissed. Once, during a holiday dinner, Gerald raised his glass. "To Miranda," he announced. "Accepted early to Harvard, just like we knew she would." Applause filled the room. Miranda smiled, confident and radiant. Dulce clapped too, her hands soft, careful not to draw attention. Later that night, she overheard her parents in the study. "What about Dulce?" Lorraine asked, almost as an obligation. Gerald snorted. "She'll figure something out. Not everyone's meant for greatness." Something inside Dulce tightened, then went quiet. By the time she was an adult, the label followed her everywhere. The dumb one, not said as often out loud anymore, but always implied. At charity events, at business lunches. In a way, conversations shifted away from her. She learned to lower her eyes, to nod, to absorb. But alone in her room at night, Dulce noticed things. How stories had structure, even if the words blurred. how people repeated patterns without realizing it, how power moved in rooms, not by volume, but by attention. She wasn't stupid. She had never been stupid. She just survived differently. And that realization, quiet, fragile, unfinished, was the first thing that truly belonged to her. Chapter 2. Eleanor's Eyes. Eleanor Whitford was the only person in the family who looked directly at Dulce. Not through her, not past her, not with that familiar mix of disappointment and impatience, but at her, as if Dulce were something unfinished rather than defective. Eleanor lived in a limestone townhouse 2 streets away from the family's main residence. It was older, quieter, and filled with the smell of books and polished wood. Dulce was sent there often as a child, usually when her parents had events or meetings they didn't want her slowing down. Gerald called it keeping her occupied. Dulce quickly learned it was the safest place she knew. Eleanor would sit by the window each afternoon, glasses perched low on her nose, reading financial reports the way other grandmothers read novels. Her hair was always neatly pinned, her posture straight despite her age. She didn't raise her voice often, but when she spoke, people listened, including Dulce. "Come here," Eleanor said one afternoon when Dulce was 9. She tapped the table beside her. "Show me what you're working on." Dulce hesitated, clutching her workbook. The page was a mess, words crossed out, letters reversed, margins scribbled with frustrated attempts. "I'm bad at it," Dulce said before Eleanor could see. "Daddy says I don't focus." Eleanor took the book anyway. She didn't frown. She didn't sigh. She studied the page carefully, then looked up. "You're not bad at this," Eleanor said calmly. "You're bad at this way of doing it." Dulce blinked. No one had ever separated the two before. Eleanor closed the book and slid it aside. "Come," she said, standing slowly. "I want to show you something." They walked to the window, overlooking the street. Eleanor pointed to the row of buildings across from them. Brick, stone, steel, each one different. "What do you see?" Eleanor asked. "Buildings," Dulce said uncertainly. "Look again." Dulce squinted. She noticed the way some windows lined up perfectly while others didn't. How one building leaned just slightly inward. How the fire escapes followed a pattern, like ribs. The third one from the corner was built later. Dulce said suddenly. "It doesn't match the others." Eleanor smiled. "Exactly." She guided Dulce back to the table and spread out a few blueprints. "These are properties I bought before your father was even out of school," she said. "Tell me what you notice." Dulce leaned closer. The lines made sense. They stayed still. They behaved. "This one wastes space," Dulce said, pointing. "And this one hides it." Eleanor's eyes sharpened, not with surprise, but recognition. From then on, their afternoons changed. They stopped pretending Dulce needed to catch up to anyone. Eleanor never asked her to read aloud. Instead, she taught her to see patterns in ledgers, flaws in layouts, gaps in arguments. She explained business not as memorization, but as logic. "Words are only one language," Eleanor said once, sliding a stack of documents aside. "Your parents worship them because they're loud. But power rarely is." Dulce absorbed everything. Sometimes Gerald would stop by unannounced. He would glance at the table, frown at the scattered diagrams. "What is all this?" he asked one evening. "Education," Eleanor replied without looking up. "She should be focusing on school," Gerald said. "Not this." Eleanor finally met his eyes. "She is focusing on something real." Gerald scoffed. "She's slow, Mother. You know that." The room went still. Eleanor's voice was quiet but sharp. "No, she is different. And you mistake inconvenience for weakness." Gerald flushed. "You always had a soft spot for her." Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "I built this company while men like you waited for permission. Don't tell me what weakness looks like." After Gerald left, Dulce sat frozen. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll make him angry." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "They don't see what you are. And because they don't see it, they won't protect it." "Protect what?" Dulce asked. "Timing," Eleanor replied. "And truth." As Dulce grew older, those words stayed with her, even when she didn't fully understand them. Eleanor grew quieter with age, but sharper in her observations. She stopped including Gerald in certain conversations. She began organizing documents meticulously, labeling boxes, locking drawers. Once, when Dulce was 16, she found Eleanor staring at a stack of papers, jaw tight. "Your father thinks ownership is entitlement," Eleanor said, not looking up. "He forgets who built the foundation." "Is he in trouble?" Dulce asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Only if truth arrives on time." When Eleanor fell ill, the house changed. Doctors came and went. Gerald visited, polite and impatient. Miranda visited once, checking her watch. Dulce came every day after school, sitting by Eleanor's bed, holding her hand. "You see clearly," Eleanor whispered one evening. "Never let them rush you." "I won't," Dulce promised, tears blurring the room. Eleanor died quietly in her sleep 3 days later. The funeral was formal, controlled. Gerald spoke at length about legacy. Miranda stood beside him, composed and elegant. Dulce stood slightly behind, dressed in black, unnoticed. Afterward, there were meetings. Lawyers. Closed doors. Dulce was not invited. She sat alone in Eleanor's empty living room later that evening, the silence pressing in, the lessons echoing louder than any goodbye. Chapter 3. The Invisible Employee. Whitford Properties occupied 6 floors of a glass and steel building overlooking Midtown, its lobby designed to impress investors before they ever reached the elevators. Marble floors, quiet fountains, a wall engraved with the company's founding year, 1959, Eleanor Whitford's vision etched into polished stone. Dulce entered through the side doors every morning. Her badge granted her access to the administrative floor, not the executive levels where sunlight poured through open layouts and assistants brought espresso without being asked. Dulce's workspace was a narrow desk wedged between filing cabinets, close enough to the copy machine that it hummed in her bones. Her title was Administrative Support Associate. It sounded temporary. It wasn't. "Morning, Dulce," Kevin from accounting said one day, already walking past her. "Morning," she replied, though he didn't hear it. Her tasks were endless and invisible, sorting contracts, updating spreadsheets, organizing calendars that never included her. She knew which executives preferred paper copies and which pretended not to. She knew who argued in meetings by the sound of their footsteps afterward. She was paid just enough to remind her she was replaceable. Miranda, meanwhile, arrived like a headline. Her name appeared on internal emails with titles that grew longer every quarter. Junior Analyst, Strategic Development Lead, Executive Associate. People straightened when she walked by. Conversations paused. At company meetings Dulce wasn't invited to, Miranda stood beside Gerald, confident and glowing. "This quarter's growth is largely due to Miranda's initiative," Gerald announced once, smiling broadly. Applause followed. Dulce heard about it later, through whispers near the printer. "Must be nice," someone muttered. Dulce kept her eyes on her screen. She noticed things others didn't. How Project Alder had cost more than projected because 3 departments duplicated work. How a commercial property in Queens bled money due to outdated lease terms no one bothered to renegotiate. How Gerald favored loud confidence over quiet accuracy. She began keeping notes, not formally, not anywhere official, just patterns, observations, a private map of how the company truly functioned. One afternoon, Dulce hesitated before knocking on her supervisor's door. "Come in," Linda said, barely looking up. "I noticed something in the East Side portfolio," Dulce began carefully. "There's a scheduling overlap that's costing. Is this in your scope?" Linda interrupted. "I think it affects, then send an email," Linda said. "I'll forward it if necessary." Dulce nodded. She sent the email. It was never forwarded. Weeks later, the same issue was raised in a meeting Dulce wasn't allowed to attend, credited to Miranda. At lunch, Dulce ate alone more often than not. She watched groups gather and dissolve, laughter rising and falling. When she did join others, conversations shifted politely around her, like furniture no one wanted to bump into. "You're Miranda's sister, right?" a new hire asked once. "Yes." "Oh," the woman said, then smiled too brightly. That must be interesting. Dulce smiled back, practiced and small. Her paycheck arrived bi-weekly. It barely covered rent and transit. When she once asked HR about a raise, the representative adjusted her glasses and said, "Given your role and performance metrics, this is appropriate." "What metrics?" Dulce asked. The woman blinked. "Exactly. The worst part wasn't the work. It was the erasure." Miranda walked through the office like she belonged to it. Dulce existed as if she were temporary, despite years of service. At family dinners, Gerald praised Miranda's leadership, her vision. "And Dulce helps with paperwork," Lorraine added once, as if describing a hobby. Dulce stopped correcting them. As Miranda's graduation celebration approached, a lavish affair planned at the plaza, tension filled the office. Invitations circulated. Decorations were discussed openly. Dulce received hers via mail, no note attached. 3 days before the event, Linda stopped by Dulce's desk. "Can you come to HR?" she asked. "Now." "Yes." The HR office smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. The representative from before sat behind the desk, folder already open. "This won't take long," she said. "Dulce Saturday, we've decided to restructure administrative support," the woman continued smoothly. "Your position is being eliminated." "Oh," Dulce said. "There's a severance package," Linda added quickly. "Standard. Is there feedback?" Dulce asked. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. The HR representative glanced at the folder. "This isn't performance-related." Dulce nodded. She stood, handed over her badge. At her desk, she packed quietly. No one noticed. The printer hummed. Phones rang. The company moved on without pause. As she stepped outside, the glass doors sliding shut behind her, Dulce realized she had never truly been seen there at all. Chapter 4: The Night of Erasure. The Plaza Hotel glittered the way money always did, quietly, confidently, as if it had never known doubt. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors. Waiters in black jackets moved with practiced grace, balancing trays of champagne flutes and silver hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played near the balcony, the music soft enough to sound expensive. 350 guests filled the ballroom. Investors, board members, socialites, old family friends whose surnames carried weight. Banners near the stage read, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford Dulce arrived alone." She wore a simple black dress she'd owned for years, tailored enough to pass, modest enough to disappear. At the entrance, a young attendant checked her name, smiled politely, and handed her a program without comment. No one asked how she was. She scanned the room instinctively, not looking for attention, only for somewhere to sit that wouldn't be in the way. Near the back, beside a tall floral arrangement that partially blocked the view of the stage, she found an empty chair. It wasn't assigned. No place card bore her name. That felt about right. As she sat, conversation washed over her in fragments. "Gerald must be so proud. Harvard and law school, remarkable. She's exactly what the company needs." Dulce folded her hands in her lap. She watched Miranda across the room, radiant in white, surrounded by laughter and cameras. Miranda's smile was effortless, practiced, the kind that assumed applause would follow. Gerald stood beside her, hand resting possessively on Miranda's shoulder. Lorraine floated nearby, greeting guests with rehearsed warmth. Dulce shifted in her seat as people passed without seeing her. Once, an elderly investor paused near her row, glanced at her, frowned as if trying to place her face, then turned away. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush rippled through the ballroom as Gerald stepped onto the stage. The string quartet fell silent. Cameras lifted. Glasses were set down. "My friends," Gerald began, his voice amplified, smooth with pride. "Tonight is not just a celebration of my daughter's graduation. It is a celebration of the future." Applause swelled. Dulce felt it vibrate through the floor. "Miranda has worked tirelessly," Gerald continued. "She has proven herself academically, strategically, and professionally." Miranda laughed softly, brushing hair from her face. The crowd adored her. "As many of you know," Gerald said, Our family has always believed in preparing the next generation. Dulce's chest tightened, though she didn't know why. Effective immediately, Gerald announced, Miranda will be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer of Whitford Properties. The applause was thunderous. Dulce didn't clap at first. She stared at the stage, the words sinking slowly, painfully. CEO. Gerald raised his hand for quiet, smiling wider. And that's not all, he said. As part of her inheritance, Miranda will be taking ownership of the Whitestone estate, $13 million worth of history. Gasps, whispers, admiring murmurs. A Tesla Model X, Gerald added lightly, to laughter. And of course, full control of the family's assets. The room erupted. People stood. Champagne glasses lifted. Someone shouted, "Well deserved." Dulce felt something hollow open inside her. No pause followed. No acknowledgement of anyone else. No mention of second daughter sitting quietly in the back of the room. She looked down at her hands, suddenly unsure where to put them. Applause roared around her, but she remained still, invisible, erased. Lorraine glanced briefly across the room, her eyes sliding past Dulce without stopping. Miranda took the microphone, voice bright. "I couldn't have done this without my parents' belief in me," she said. "They always knew my potential." Dulce swallowed. She remembered report cards folded carefully, never displayed. The way her achievements were explained away. The quiet firing 3 days ago, still echoing in her bones. A waiter stopped beside her. "Champagne?" he asked kindly. Dulce shook her head. "No, thank you." He moved on. The applause finally faded, replaced by music and chatter once more. People surged toward Miranda, congratulating her, embracing Gerald. Dulce remained seated, the floral arrangement casting shadows across her dress. She wondered, distantly, if anyone would notice if she left. Her phone buzzed once. A generic calendar reminder she hadn't deleted. Miranda's graduation celebration. She turned it off. For the first time in years, a question rose, uninvited, heavy and raw. What if they're right? What if she really was what they had always implied? Lesser, forgettable, undeserving of space. Dulce leaned back in her chair, the noise of the room dulling to a distant hum, and stared at the stage as if it belonged to another world entirely. Chapter 5. The Envelope. Dulce remained seated long after the applause faded. The ballroom had returned to its earlier rhythm, music rising, laughter spilling, waiters weaving between guests, but all felt distant, as if she were watching it through thick glass. The stage where Gerald had stood now hosted a slow-moving cluster of well-wishers. Miranda glowed at the center of it, receiving praise like something owed. Dulce stared at the empty space beside her chair. Her chest felt tight, not with anger yet, just with the familiar ache of having been forgotten. Again, "Miss Whitford." The voice was low, careful. Dulce looked up. A man stood at the edge of her row, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that suggested money without demanding attention. He held himself with the stillness of someone used to rooms like this, but uninterested in impressing them. "Yes," Dulce said, her voice quieter than she intended. "May I sit?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He took the chair beside her, setting a slim leather portfolio on his knee. "My name is Jonathan Ellis," he said. "I was Eleanor Whitford's attorney." The name hit her like a sudden change in pressure. "My grandmother's lawyer?" Dulce asked. Jonathan inclined his head. "For over 30 years." Dulce glanced instinctively toward the stage, half expecting someone to notice them, to interrupt. No one did. They were still invisible here. "I was instructed to wait until this moment," Jonathan continued. "Specifically this moment." "What moment?" Dulce asked. He studied her face, as if weighing something. Then he reached into his portfolio and withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. "For you," he said, holding it out. Dulce didn't take it immediately. Her fingers hovered inches away. "I don't understand," she said. Jonathan leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Your grandmother was very precise. She believed timing mattered as much as truth." He paused, then whispered, Now it's time to show them who you really are. Her breath caught. The words echoed, familiar, unmistakable. Eleanor's voice carried through someone else's mouth. Dulce took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. Jonathan stood. "Read it somewhere private," he said, "and do not delay." "Wait," Dulce said, gripping the envelope. "Why now?" "Because," Jonathan replied evenly, "this was the last place they would ever expect you to matter." He walked away before she could ask anything else. Dulce sat frozen, the envelope resting in her lap. Around her, laughter rose. Glasses clinked. Someone brushed past her chair without noticing. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in Eleanor's firm script, and several legal documents clipped neatly together. She unfolded the letter first. "My dear Dulce, if you are reading this, then Gerald has finally shown you exactly who he is in public." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry I could not protect you from his smallness while I was alive. I can protect you now." Dulce's eyes moved faster, her pulse loud in her ears. "I'll leave you my controlling interest in Whitford Properties. 51%. Enough that no one can speak over you again." She stopped breathing. 51%. Controlling interest. She flipped to the documents, heart pounding. Numbers blurred at first, then snapped into focus as they always did when they mattered. Her name, her grandmother's signature. Legal language confirming ownership. A highlighted clause caught her attention. "This inheritance is contingent upon action within 72 hours of receipt." 72 hours. Her hand shook harder now. She returned to the letter. "Gerald will tell himself this is betrayal. It is not. It is consequence. He tried to strip me of control once. I documented everything. Jonathan has the rest." Dulce swallowed. "You see patterns others ignore. That is why I trusted you. Do not ask for permission. Do not wait for approval. Step forward." Tears burned her eyes, unexpected and sharp. She lowered the papers slowly, the room rushing back into focus. Miranda laughed somewhere nearby. Gerald's voice boomed with confidence, unchallenged. They had no idea. Shock gave way to disbelief. "This can't be real," a part of her whispered. "This doesn't happen to people like you." But the numbers were right. The structure made sense. Eleanor never made mistakes. Clarity followed, steady and cold. This wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility. Dulce looked down at the envelope again, at her grandmother's handwriting, at the weight of decades of preparation pressed into a few sheets of paper. For the first time that night, she stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she stayed upright. She slipped the documents back into the envelope and held it close to her chest. As she moved toward the exit, no one stopped her. No one asked where she was going. Outside, the city air felt sharper, cleaner. The plaza's lights glowed behind her, brilliant and indifferent. Dulce took a deep breath, then another, and in the quiet space between heartbeats, she made a choice. Chapter 6. The box Eleanor left. Eleanor's townhouse still smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Dulce hadn't been back since the funeral. Standing in the narrow entryway now, coat still on, envelope tucked safely in her bag, she felt the weight of memory press against her ribs. The place was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if Eleanor had designed silence the same way she designed buildings, deliberately. She locked the door behind her. "Okay," Dulce whispered to no one. "Okay." The wooden box sat exactly where Eleanor had once said it would be, on the bottom shelf of the study bookcase, behind a row of outdated real estate journals no one else would bother to move. It was smaller than Dulce expected, dark walnut, the corners worn smooth by age. There was no lock. Eleanor had trusted timing more than barriers. Dulce knelt and lifted the box onto the desk. For a moment, she only rested her hands on the lid, steadying herself. This wasn't grief. This wasn't fear. This was focus, the same calm that came when numbers aligned or patterns snapped into place. She opened it. Inside, everything was arranged with Eleanor's meticulous precision. On top lay a manila folder labeled in neat, firm handwriting. Foundation. Dulce opened it first. Original partnership documents. Yellowed pages bearing Eleanor's signature, young, decisive, beside others she vaguely recognized from family stories. Percentages were circled, amendments annotated, margins filled with notes, correcting assumptions, protecting control. Her breath slowed as she read. Eleanor had never been a figurehead. She had been the structure. Beneath that folder lay another, heavier one. This one read, Gerald, attempts. Dulce swallowed. Inside were copies of emails, legal drafts never finalized, proposals that would have quietly shifted ownership away from Eleanor under the guise of succession planning. Gerald's language was careful, flattering, manipulative, for the good of the company, to streamline decision-making. Dulce felt a flicker of anger, but she set it aside. Emotion blurred vision. Eleanor had taught her better. At the bottom of the box was a small digital recorder and a stack of labeled flash drives. Dulce plugged one into her laptop. Voices filled the room. This isn't what Eleanor agreed to, a man said. She's old, Gerald replied. She doesn't understand the future. Dulce's fingers curled against the desk. Another recording. We shouldn't be having this meeting without her present. She'll sign, Gerald said. She always does. Dulce closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them. Truth wasn't dramatic. It was cumulative. She spent the rest of the night listening, reading, sorting, not as a granddaughter, but as a strategist. She made lists, timelines. She mapped alliances she'd overheard in passing during her years as an invisible employee and matched them to the voices in the recordings. By morning, the sun cut pale lines across the study floor. Dulce brewed coffee in Eleanor's kitchen, drank it black, and began making calls. Her first was to Martin Hale, a senior board member who had once muttered near the elevator. Gerald confuses noise with leadership. He answered on the third ring. This is Martin. Mr. Hale, Dulce said. This is Dulce Whitford. There was a pause. Yes, he said cautiously. How can I help you? I believe my grandmother intended for us to speak, Dulce replied. Privately. Another pause, longer this time. I wonder when that might happen, he said finally. Where are you? They met 2 hours later at a quiet cafe far from Midtown. Martin studied her over his coffee. You don't look like someone chasing revenge, he observed. I'm not, Dulce said. I'm chasing accuracy. She slid a document across the table. He read, slowly, carefully. When he looked up, his expression had changed. Do you know what this means? Yes, Dulce said, and I know who else needs to see it. Calls followed. Some went unanswered. Some ended quickly, but a few enough resulted in meetings. At one point, a woman named Ruth Delgado leaned back in her chair and said, I told Eleanor once that Gerald would overreach. What did she say? Dulce asked. That she was already accounting for it. Dulce allowed herself a small, private smile. She didn't rehearse speeches. She didn't imagine confrontations. She focused on sequence, leverage, procedure. Eleanor had never won by raising her voice. By the second evening, Dulce sat alone again in the study, the box now empty, its contents arranged neatly into folders she could carry. Her phone buzzed. Jonathan Ellis. It's done, he said when she answered. The will has been verified. The clause stands. Good, Dulce replied. When would you like to proceed? Dulce glanced at the documents spread before her, the quiet room, the weight of her grandmother's preparation surrounding her like scaffolding. Schedule the boardroom, she said. As soon as possible. Jonathan paused. They won't be kind. Dulce's voice was steady. They don't have to be. She ended the call, closed Eleanor's box, and stood. The meeting was set. Chapter 7. The Boardroom. The boardroom on the 38th floor had always intimidated Dulce. It wasn't the size, though the long glass table could seat 20, nor the view of Manhattan stretched arrogantly beyond the windows. It was the certainty with which power lived there. Decisions were made in that room that reshaped neighborhoods, fortunes, lives. Dulce had passed the door countless times carrying files, coffee, messages she was never meant to hear. She had never been invited inside. Until now. The door opened, and Dulce stepped in. Conversation halted, not abruptly, but with a confused lag, as if the room hadn't yet decided whether she belonged there enough to react. Gerald sat at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, already in command mode. Miranda was 2 seats to his right, tablet in hand, polished and composed. Around them sat board members, some familiar, some distant, faces turning slowly toward Dulce with varying degrees of curiosity and irritation. Gerald frowned first. "This is a closed meeting," he said. "We'll let you in." Dulce walked to the chair opposite him and placed her folder on the table. "I did," she said calmly. A few eyebrows lifted. Miranda let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Is this a joke?" Gerald's expression hardened. "Dulce, you're not an employee anymore." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." A man at the far end leaned toward his neighbor. "Is this appropriate?" Gerald exhaled sharply. "We'll discuss this later. Please leave." Dulce didn't move. "I'm here as a shareholder," she said. The room reacted this time. A low murmur rippled across the table. Someone scoffed. Someone else smiled faintly, indulgently. "Dulce," Miranda said, her tone strained with patience, "this isn't funny. You don't understand how this works." Gerald waved a dismissive hand. "She's confused. She always has been." The words landed exactly as they always had. Dulce opened her folder. "I understand exactly how this works," she said, "and I'm asking that you allow me 5 minutes before deciding whether I belong here." There was a pause. Martin Hale cleared his throat. 5 minutes, he said. "Won't kill us." Gerald shot him a look. "This is absurd." "Humor her," Ruth Delgado added coolly. "We've already wasted more time than that." Gerald leaned back, arms crossed. "Fine. 5 minutes." Dulce placed the first document on the table and slid it forward. "This is my grandmother's will," she said. "Executed, verified, and legally binding." Gerald laughed once, sharply. "My mother's will has already been handled." "This is the final will," Dulce replied. "Filed separately, triggered by specific conditions." Miranda leaned forward, scanning the page. Her face shifted just slightly. "Dad," she said quietly, "this is—" Gerald waved her off. "She can't even read properly. You expect us to believe she understands a legal document." A few chuckles surfaced. Not many, but enough. Dulce didn't react. She reached into her folder again. "These are original partnership agreements," she continued, "signed by Eleanor Whitford. They establish her controlling interest." She placed down another set of pages. "These are documented attempts to reallocate that control without her consent." Gerald's smile faltered. "This," Dulce said, holding up a small device, "is a recording from a board meeting held without Eleanor present." She pressed play. Gerald's voice filled the room. "She'll sign. She always does." The silence that followed was thick, immediate. Dulce turned the device off. Jonathan Ellis, seated quietly near the door, stood. "For clarity," he said, "the will grants Ms. Dulce Whitford 51% ownership of Whitford Properties. Effective immediately." The room froze. "That's impossible," Gerald said. "She's lying." Jonathan met his gaze. "The documentation has been reviewed by independent counsel. The percentage is accurate." Miranda stared at Dulce, as if seeing her for the first time. 51%. Majority. Control. A board member whispered, "Jesus." Another leaned back slowly, reassessing the room. Gerald stood abruptly. "This is a manipulation." "My mother was careful," Ruth said. Gerald stopped. Dulce gathered her papers, stacking them neatly. "I'm not here to take anything emotionally," she said. "I'm here to correct something structurally." No one interrupted her now. "For years," Dulce continued, "I watched this company operate from the margins. I saw inefficiencies dismissed because they weren't loud. I saw loyalty confused with obedience." She met Gerald's eyes. "And I saw control mistaken for leadership." Gerald's face had gone pale. Jonathan spoke again. "Ms. Whitford now holds majority voting rights. Any motion may be called at her discretion." The weight of that statement settled slowly, inevitably. No one laughed. No one scoffed. Even the air seemed to shift. Gerald looked around the table, searching for alignment, for support that had always been there before. This time, he found hesitation, distance, calculation. He sat back down slowly. Dulce closed her folder. The room was silent. And for the first time in his life, Gerald realized the power he thought was permanent no longer belonged to him. Chapter 8. Justice Without Revenge. The boardroom felt different that morning. Dulce arrived early, calm, carrying only the folder she had used yesterday. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, but there was also tension, invisible and thick, like fog curling around the edges of the glass walls. She didn't flinch at the subtle glances from staff who knew she now commanded the room. She didn't need to. Eleanor's lessons, years of observation, of patience, of understanding patterns, had prepared her for this. Gerald was already there, pacing near the head of the table. He stopped when Dulce entered, eyes narrowing. Miranda followed, her tablet clutched tightly. She looked confident, but there was a tremor in her jaw that betrayed her nerves. "You're here early," Gerald said, voice tight. "I prefer to be prepared," Dulce replied evenly, sliding her folder onto the table. Gerald laughed shortly, but sounded forced. "Prepared? For what? You don't even have experience running a company." Dulce didn't respond immediately. She opened the folder and laid out the documents in front of her. Eleanor's will, board records, and her meticulously organized notes from the previous night. "I am here to ensure the company is led according to the law, not emotion," she said. "And that requires a vote of confidence from the board regarding current leadership." Gerald's lips twitched. "A vote of confidence? You mean to embarrass me in front of these people?" "No," Dulce said calmly. "I mean to formalize the process that has always been overlooked. Accountability is not embarrassment, it's business." Miranda whispered something to her father, but Dulce didn't look at them. She addressed the board directly. "I will give each of you the choice to vote based on facts, evidence, and governance. This is your responsibility, not mine. I will preside." A board member, older and usually deferential to Gerald, cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitford, are you saying you will not remove Gerald yourself?" Dulce met his gaze steadily. "No, I am not acting on revenge. I am acting on principle." The room murmured. A few board members exchanged glances, realizing the gravity of the moment. Gerald's confident posture faltered as he began to understand that authority was no longer automatic. Dulce turned to Jonathan Ellis briefly. He nodded, a quiet reassurance that she had all the legal support necessary. She returned her focus to the board. "Shall we begin?" she asked. Votes were called aloud one by one. Names, positions, and decisions registered with the clerk, all under Dulce's watchful eye. "Martin Hale," she prompted. "No confidence," he said firmly. "Ruth Delgado." "No confidence," she repeated, feeling the weight of each word settle like stones. As the roll continued, Gerald's face paled. He tried to interject, tried to charm or cajole, but Dulce's calm authority overpowered him. Every argument, every interruption was met with poised correction, never anger. "This is not personal," Dulce said, as another vote rang out against Gerald. "This is procedure." By the time the last board member had spoken, the result was clear. No confidence. A stunned silence filled the room. Gerald slumped into his chair, jaw tight. He looked around the table at faces he had counted on for loyalty, and found only certainty, quiet and resolute. For the first time in decades, he realized that his influence had evaporated. Miranda's tablet slipped from her hands onto the table. She looked from Dulce to the board members, eyes wide. Pride and entitlement had been her shield for so long, but now it shattered visibly. She opened her mouth, then closed it, uncertain. Dulce rose slowly and walked to the head of the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. Every movement was measured, every gesture precise. Gerald stared at her, disbelieving, yet powerless. "Mr. Whitford," Dulce said softly, yet firmly, "your resignation is effective immediately. The board has voted. The company's governance is intact. You may submit your formal notice." Gerald's hands trembled slightly as he signed the form that had been quietly prepared on the side. He looked up once, searching Dulce's eyes, perhaps expecting anger, cruelty, or vindictive glee. He found none, just clarity. Miranda attempted a weak protest. This isn't fair." "No," Dulce replied. "It is lawful. It is precise. It is justice, not revenge." Miranda's shoulders slumped. She had been groomed to believe she could rely on her family's power, her father's decisions, her mother's approval. Now, the floor beneath her entitlement had shifted. Publicly, in a room full of witnesses, her certainty evaporated. Dulce returned to her chair, placing Eleanor's folder neatly before her. She exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The board watched, silent, some in awe, some still processing the sudden shift in authority. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan continued its relentless hum. Cars moved like precise machines below, lights flickered in office towers, and pedestrians walked unaware of the upheaval in the 38th floor boardroom. Inside, the air had changed. Power was no longer assumed. Control had shifted silently, but decisively. Gerald had been forced to recognize a truth he had refused to see for years. Influence without legitimacy could not last. Dulce remained composed, controlled, the very embodiment of the lesson Eleanor had instilled in her. Authority was not taken with force, but earned through precision, evidence, and patience. No one in that room doubted the outcome. Justice had been delivered, not in shouting, not in retaliation, but in procedure, in clarity, in unwavering calm. For the first time, Dulce felt the quiet satisfaction of vindication, not the chaotic rush of revenge, but the steady confirmation of rightness. The boardroom was hers to command now, not with cruelty, but with certainty. Gerald sat at the head of the table, defeated, while Dulce, serene and composed, understood the true weight of Eleanor's foresight. Her victory was complete. Not loud, not vengeful, just exact. Justice, not cruelty, won. Chapter 9, The Fallout. The morning after the boardroom vote, Manhattan woke to headlines that refused to ignore Whitford Properties. Whitford shakeup. Daughter takes control. Gerald Whitford steps down after board vote. Miranda Whitford's inheritance questioned amid family turmoil. Dulce sat in Eleanor's study, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of her, scrolling through the news on her laptop. The articles were careful, measured, but the implications were clear. Gerald's authority was no longer absolute. Investors had already begun quietly adjusting their positions, calling for meetings, requesting assurances. Her phone rang, one call after another. Some were tentative, cordial, testing her knowledge. Others were blunt, demanding answers. Dulce answered each calmly, confidently, with the precision she had learned from years of watching and listening. "Ms. Whitford," a deep voice said, "this is Charles Beaumont from Hightower Investments. We'd like to discuss portfolio reallocation in light of recent events." "Of course," Dulce replied. "Let's schedule a time. I've reviewed all active projects and have a proposal prepared." Another call came from Ruth Delgado, her longtime ally on the board. "Congratulations," Ruth said dryly. "Not that it changes much, but seeing you handle Gerald without a single emotional outburst? Impressive." "I'm only interested in structure," Dulce said, tone precise. "Not revenge." Meanwhile, Gerald moved through the city like a man untethered. Invitations he once received without effort were delayed or canceled outright. Socialites and colleagues who had long relied on his presence in the room now treated him with polite distance, wary of the new balance of power. Miranda stayed close to her father, but the shine of entitlement had dulled. She found herself repeatedly corrected during investor briefings, and even casual remarks about the family's legacy no longer carried weight. By the end of the week, Dulce was offered a formal role, strategic leadership advisor, reporting directly to the board, with autonomy over restructuring, long-term planning, and sustainability initiatives. She did not take the CEO position. She did not need the title. She needed control over influence, the ability to implement what Eleanor had built and what she had carefully preserved. After settling her professional footing, Dulce returned home to confront the personal fallout. She asked her mother, Lorraine, to meet in Eleanor's study. Lorraine arrived with a tentative smile, hands clasped nervously. Dulce, I stop. Dulce said gently but firmly. I need honesty, not excuses. Lorraine's eyes glistened. I failed you. I was so focused on Miranda's achievements that I didn't see your struggles. You ignore them, Dulce said, voice steady. Every grade, every report, every moment I asked for guidance, you chose discomfort over support. You let Gerald humiliate me. You let Miranda's success overshadow me. You didn't protect me. Lorraine swallowed, nodding slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. I truly am. Dulce's expression softened slightly. Apologies don't erase years, Mother, but I accept them, with boundaries. Her next meeting was with Miranda, who had requested the conversation after several awkward boardroom interactions and investor briefings. I never realized, Miranda began. Not how they treated you. Not how you... I saw it all, Dulce interrupted gently. I knew what you were complicit in, even when you didn't act maliciously. You laughed at their jokes. You never questioned favoritism. You benefited from it. And that's okay. We're family, but I will not pretend it didn't affect me. Miranda's lips quivered. I'm sorry. I really am. I wish I had. You can't rewrite the past, Dulce said. But you can choose what you do now. I'm willing to move forward, but it will be with honesty, not pretense. Boundaries, Miranda. You need to respect them. The conversations left Dulce emotionally drained but clear-headed. She didn't seek reconciliation, at least not in the sense of erasing the past. She sought truth, respect, recognition of harm, and the establishment of limits that would ensure it didn't happen again. Over the following weeks, Dulce's presence in the company shifted culture subtly but significantly. Staff who had once overlooked her now sought her insight. Investors treated her opinions with weight. Strategic initiatives she proposed were implemented efficiently, cleanly, without drama. Her work wasn't loud. It was precise, structural, enduring. And, at home, she began reclaiming herself. Her apartment, modest yet carefully curated, became her sanctuary. She placed Eleanor's photographs and letters in places she could see each day. Patterns, structures, strategy, these were the things she had always understood. Now, they were hers to shape. She didn't revel in Gerald's downfall. She observed it, not with satisfaction, but with acknowledgement. Power shifts, she realized, were inevitable when truth was aligned with action. Gerald, meanwhile, retreated into polite obscurity, his influence dwindling as quietly as it had once risen. Miranda slowly began to navigate her own path, humbled, learning that entitlement was not a substitute for competence. Dulce, in contrast, moved with calm precision, establishing routines, setting schedules, creating systems. Each day reinforced her belief. Justice was stronger than revenge, clarity stronger than anger, and boundaries stronger than resentment. By the end of the month, the family dynamics had shifted permanently. Conversations at dinners were measured. Lorraine spoke less of achievements, more of acknowledgement. Miranda's comments were cautious, reflective, and Dulce responded only as far as propriety demanded. She wasn't seeking warmth. She wasn't seeking accolades. She was seeking balance, recognition, a seat where she could be herself, without constant erasure or belittlement. Dulce walked past the boardroom glass every morning on her way to her office space. She could see the patterns in meetings, the flow of conversation, the subtle maneuvers of executives. And she smiled faintly to herself. She had survived mockery, neglect, and favoritism. She had endured humiliation, and yet she remained unbroken. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady, strategic, observed, prepared. Her inheritance, she realized, had never been the money or the mansion. It had been clarity, confidence, and control, the tools to define her own worth. And in those truths, Dulce found peace. Boundaries were set. Honesty was spoken. Respect was established. No reconciliation, no fantasy of a perfect family, but the beginnings of something real. Chapter 10, Seeing Clearly. Dulce unlocked the door to her new apartment and stepped inside. The smell of fresh paint mixed with a faint trace of cedar from the floors. The space was modest, 2 bedrooms, a living room with tall windows that caught the afternoon light, and a kitchen that gleamed with clean lines, but to Dulce, it was vast. For the first time in decades, she had a home that belonged entirely to her, a place defined not by someone else's expectations, or their applause, or their disappointment, but by her choices. She set down her bag and walked to the windows, letting the light spill across her face. The city hummed below, oblivious, yet familiar, as if Manhattan itself had been waiting for this moment. Dulce closed her eyes and breathed deeply. This is mine, she thought. Every inch. Her phone buzzed. It was Jonathan Ellis, checking in after weeks of boardroom upheaval. "How are you settling in?" he asked. Quietly, Dulce replied with a small smile. "And purposefully." "Good," Jonathan said, voice approving. "The board appreciates your direction. Investors are aligned. You've created stability faster than anyone expected." Dulce didn't allow herself to swell with pride. Instead, she considered the work ahead. The company still had projects that were efficient but unsustainable, deals that required oversight, and initiatives that Eleanor had always envisioned but never had the time to implement. "I want to start the sustainability division next week," she said firmly. "We'll focus on renewable projects, energy efficiency, and community-oriented developments. We'll measure impact, not just profit." Jonathan paused, impressed. "That's ambitious." "Necessary," Dulce corrected, her voice steady. "And we'll execute it methodically. No shortcuts." After hanging up, Dulce sat at her small dining table, a notebook open before her. She began sketching strategies, writing goals, and listing the resources she would need. Every detail mattered, but the overwhelming sense of possibility made the task exhilarating rather than intimidating. Her mind wandered for a moment to the early mornings of dyslexia, letters swimming, numbers twisting, instructions getting lost in translation. She had spent years trying to force herself into someone else's mold, believing that her struggles were flaws rather than gifts. Now, she saw them clearly. Dyslexia had trained her to observe patterns, to think in systems, to notice the connections others missed. It had forced her to listen, to watch, to understand deeply before acting. The very thing her parents called slow had become her most valuable tool. A memory surfaced, Eleanor, sitting across from her in that quiet study, leaning close to explain architectural plans not through words, but through shapes and numbers. "They don't see what you are," Eleanor had said. At the time, Dulce hadn't understood. But now, every decision she made, every strategy she planned, every subtle observation in board meetings traced back to that lesson. Dulce poured herself a cup of tea and walked to the living room window again. Sunlight warmed her arms as she looked out at the streets below. She thought about the tumultuous months behind her, the humiliation at the graduation party, the firing from the family company, the confrontation in the boardroom, the careful orchestration of truth that had restored order. And she realized the true inheritance Eleanor had left her. It wasn't the controlling stake in Whitford Properties. It wasn't the portfolio of assets or the corporate title. It was self-worth, courage, clarity, tools that no one could take away, weapons of precision that required no cruelty to wield. Dulce remembered sitting at her grandmother's desk, holding that wooden box, listening to the recordings, examining the original documents. The sensation of comprehension, of finally seeing the invisible patterns of power, was intoxicating, not because it gave her leverage over others, but because it revealed her own capacity. She sipped her tea and smiled faintly. Being underestimated had been her advantage all along. Every doubt cast on her intelligence, every dismissive glance, every whispered joke about her dyslexia had given her time to observe, to learn, to prepare. While the world celebrated the obvious, she had mastered the subtle. While they rushed, she planned. While they assumed, she understood. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Miranda. "I want to learn. Can we talk?" Dulce considered it. She wasn't naive. She understood boundaries now. "Yes," she typed back, but only honestly. She placed the phone down and turned to her notebook, continuing to plan the new sustainability division. She outlined partnerships, projected outcomes, and timelines with the meticulous care that had always set her apart. There was no rush, no showmanship, only clarity of purpose. For hours, Dulce worked alone, moving pieces on the page like a chess player, mapping a game 3 moves ahead. She organized meetings, drafted strategies, and imagined programs that would not only improve the company's performance, but leave a lasting, positive mark on communities. Every detail mattered because she could see the consequences of neglect and the potential in precision. Evening came, and the city lights blinked to life. Cars and taxis crawled below, streetlights reflected in windows across the avenue. Dulce stood again by her window, leaning against the frame, and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She was no longer defined by the judgments of her family, the whispers of colleagues, or the expectations of society. She was defined by her choices, her vision, and her courage. The quiet confidence she felt was different from applause. It did not require recognition, validation, or acknowledgement. It was steadier, deeper, an internal sense of knowing. Dulce's gaze lingered on the skyline. She thought of Eleanor's voice, the lessons learned, the preparation executed flawlessly. The inheritance had been intangible, but infinitely more powerful than any mansion, any check, any title. And she understood, fully, that the value of her life, her intelligence, and her contribution could never be underestimated again. She closed her eyes, breathing in the hum of the city. This was clarity. This was strength. This was hers. The wind brushed the open window, stirring the papers on the table, carrying with it the sounds of a city that never paused. Dulce smiled faintly and returned to her work, fully present, fully aware. She was no longer invisible. She had always been powerful. It just took the world longer to see it. And in that quiet, intentional space, she finally saw herself clearly. Not for applause. Not for approval, not for validation, for herself. Dulce leaned back in her chair, hands folded, chest steady. She had learned to survive by observing. She had learned to thrive by acting with precision. She had inherited courage, clarity, and self-worth. And with that, she knew she could navigate anything. The city continued its hum below. Dulce smiled, quietly confident. She was ready.